The story begins in Seoul, the capital of South Korea. People walk calmly along the street, but some very loud sounds appear, and something flies very quickly into the square. Suddenly, there is a very powerful explosion that destroys most of the city. A huge column of flame from this explosion rises up, and it was called Day X. A nuclear bomb launched by another country hit the heart of Korea. Many days before Day X, a man walks down the street and thinks that he can talk for a very long time about the day on which the world came to an end. This day was, to put it mildly, full of events. He, like Park Caillou, was preparing for the future. All the news has already said that humanity in the usual sense is already on the verge of collapse. However, only two groups of people were preparing for this. First, the most powerful of this world. In their position, you have to worry about everything. Secondly, people who truly believed in the coming end of the world. Believed so strongly that they were willing to risk everything just to escape reality. Well, he, naturally, belonged to the second type. First, he got rid of all his assets. After that, he began to greedily absorb all the information that could somehow help him survive. The first thing he bothered with was finding a place suitable for building a shelter. Park Caillou looks at the map and wonders where he should build this. He walks up to that card, reveals his marker, and thinks he has 3 key requirements. He examines the place that he marked on the map, and thinks that, firstly, it should be a sparsely populated area, where hardly anyone will come even in extreme cases, but still near the city. Secondly, the terrain must give him an advantage in the event of an attack. Thirdly, the price. All this needs to somehow fit within his budget. As a result, he found a worthy place. A deserted forest belt near the Air Force Base, near the metropolitan area. Park Caillou was embarrassed that someone was asking him, "Is he from Seoul?" The old man who works in the field says that since they are neighbors, it would be better to become friends. Park Caillou looks at him and thinks that he doesn't remember this old man's name, but he remembers his last name. This is the owner of the land near the Air Force Base, Old Man Kim. He found a place, it was time to build. He found workers to help him with the project. Park Caillou points to the equipment next to him and says that they have everything they need. He will work with them too. He immediately started working on the bucket machine and thinks the builders didn't want him to take part at first. But the price of the issue turned out to be quite small. All he needed was a couple of bottles of alcohol and plates of food. Unexpectedly, someone threw earth at one of the workers, and this attracted the attention of all the workers. Old Man Kim, with a shovel in his hands, loudly asks what they did here. They make noise and drink here every day. Do they even have permission to do this? Park Caillou looks at this and thinks that he doesn't know whether Old Man Kim's behavior was due to the possessiveness inherent in the village or not, but he didn't see any other reasons. But the fact is that no one paid attention to him. A man who worked on the equipment climbs out through the window and loudly asks, "Is he even crazy? Is he tired of living?" Old Man Kim lies in his way and says that he does not want to watch how they spoil his lands. Park Caillou thinks that in the end, he was just disturbing everyone. The man took the axe and with an angry expression on his face said that he would now explain everything clearly. Park Caillou stops him with his hand out and says he needs to calm down. He takes the axe he was holding in his hand, looks at the man and says that he will figure it out himself. He thinks that he himself is not a saint. That day his patience was completely running out. 950 days until Day X. Park Caillou is walking somewhere and stops when he notices something. He sees a man and a woman saying something to Old Man Kim. A man in expensive clothes says that he sees no point in discussing this. He must transfer the land to him, and they will take care of him. Old Man Kim, with a calm expression, says that he cannot do it. The man got very angry about this and loudly asked what he said. Why did he even sell the land? Why did you stay here? He told him directly that they would take care of him. He grabs the old man by the clothes and pulls him tightly towards him. He says very loudly that he gave the best land to his sister. And all he was left with was a collapsed house and rice fields. He throws the old man to the ground and says loudly that he must give him at least something. Park Caillou continues to stand next to them and silently watches what is happening here. A man approaches the lying old man and says that he has endured his obnoxious character for years. He must be a good father at least for the last years of his life. He raises his hand and loudly asks this old man why he is silent. So will he give him the land or not? Park Caillou decides to intervene and attracts the man's attention by coughing loudly. He stands still, looks at him, and says nothing. The man lets old man Kim go and asks where did he come from. He turns to the old man and says that he doesn't care. He expects land from him, otherwise he will burn everything here. He drives away in his car and says loudly that he warned him. Old man Kim sits on the ground with a sad expression on his face, and Park Caillou stands next to him and looks at the car driving away. He turns to the old man and looks at him silently. He asks maybe he wants to smoke. Old man Kim took a cigarette and asked if he had parents. Park Caillou sits next to him, holds a can of some kind of drink and says that they died in an accident. The old man says that he understood him. Park Caillou looks at him and asks why doesn't he want to sell the land and move. It's hard to cope with such an area on your own. Old man Kim is silent for a few seconds and thinks about it. He says with a sad expression on his face that initially even the part of the land that he gave to his daughter was a useless wasteland, just like this. But who knew that the state would decide to build a 10-lane highway there? Should he sell this land and move? He remembers his wife with whom he spent time and says that he cannot do this at all. He slowly gets up and says they need to go. Park Caillou looks at the cigarette he left and thinks that he still doesn't understand what changed then. But after this conversation, the old man's heart, which had shrunk into a small point, opened up like a 10-lane highway. When 925 days remained until day X, he stopped interfering with construction. Time passed quickly, and then this day X came and a bomb exploded in the city center. Park Caillou, who was very far from the city, hears a very loud explosion and looks at what is happening. A deafening roar shook the earth. After that, a belated siren announced the end of the world. Park Caillou was about to go to his bunker, but he was stopped by old man Kim, who called him loudly. The old man runs up to him, grabs his hand, and loudly says that his son lives in Seoul. Did he survive? He looks at him with a very worried expression on his face and says loudly that he is asking him to find him. Park Caillou thinks that the old man came to the bunker, which was already ready. He says with a calm expression that his son most likely died. Old man Kim clutches his straw hat very tightly, which he held with one hand. He lowered his head, and Park Caillou silently looks at him for a few seconds and thinks. He says there will soon be a second wave of bombings, including in the center. He strongly advises him to stay in his bunker. Old man Kim pats him on the shoulder, refuses and says that he cannot leave his house. He leaves him and says that, however, he is grateful to him for the offer. He went to his bunker and thinks that the apocalypse began without warning. Kim Won-soo, a construction worker, calls him on the phone and Park Caillou looks at the screen of his phone. He turned off the phone and looks at the large monitor that hangs in this bunker. He sees a man with an axe in his hand on this monitor. Park Caillou pays attention to the axe in his hand and thinks that there are people who have not died yet. At the same time, old man Kim looks at the many explosions that are reflected in his lifeless eyes. He remembers the days he spent with his wife. He could not come to terms with this and committed suicide amid many explosions. Park Caillou continues to think that like those who are trying their best to survive. He took the axe in his hand and looks at the bunker door, which is slowly opening. From behind this door comes a man with a tattoo on his hand, with which he is holding an axe. Park Caillou looks at him with a calm expression and thinks that there are only enemies around. 852 days before day X. Someone shot a wild boar that fell into a trap. Park Caillou looks at the body of this boar, and old man Kim runs towards him and asks loudly, "Did he kill the boar without a gun?" He's great. He says with a joyful expression that he has a hunting license. Even the state praised his skills. Park Caillou looks at him and thinks that he dug a little deeper and found out that old man Kim was a military man. His Walter, this is a very useful thing. It just won't save you from future horrors. He gets up and thinks that he should be aware of his surroundings. He looks at the high fence with barbed wire and thinks that he must watch this every second, because there is an Air Force base very close by. Korean and American troops are stationed there at the same time, as are hunters. a squad specializing in fighting monsters. These are excellent conditions to acquire the right weapon. At the moment, his plan is overly simple. When the war breaks out, he will immediately target the base near Jeonggi-do. After the explosion, there will be a very strong panic at the base. He will put on his ask and calmly take what he needs. And while he was thinking through the details, an unexpected opportunity found itself. One of the construction workers asks Park Caillou, calling him boss, if he wants to buy himself a weapon. It was 823 days before day X. The man, whose name is Kim Wan-soo, with a kind expression on his face, says that there are a lot of people like him in China. Park Caillou thinks he works for the company he entrusted to build the bunker. He is Chinese in Korea, was in a gang. Wang Su says that the Western news is silent about this, but the whole of Inner Mongolia is suffering from monsters. People are dying. And, as he understands, he does not want to be among them. Park Caillou knows that he still keeps in touch with his old colleagues, but he came to Korea precisely to earn money. Wang Su says that since he built himself a whole bunker, he probably has a lot of money. The bunker is certainly strong, that's for sure. But it will still be calmer with a weapon at hand, right? Park Caillou thinks he has a distinct Yanbian dialect. Although, it seems to him, he is deliberately using this to demonstrate his connections with the gangs of northern Yanbian. He extends his hand to him as a sign that he agrees. They shake hands, and he says that he would see what he has to offer, but only after construction. Wang Su says with a smile that they have agreed. Park Caillou thinks that at that moment he saw no reason to refuse. Sometime later on the day of sale, he thinks he hired a private detective. It turned out that Wang Su had nothing to do with the gangs from Yanbian. He was once a member of the Shounen triad, and the goods which he intended to sell to him were taken there. Wang Su, who drove up to him in a car, calls his boss and asks him to come over for a second. Park Caillou walks and thinks that, in principle, he doesn't care. Wang Su points his finger to the side and says that the guys will bring the goods soon. They need to wait for them a little. Park Caillou stood next to him, looks at him and thinks that he needs a weapon, not his story. He asks if his daughter is writing to him now. He guessed right, and his daughter wrote to him on Wang Su's phone, "When will he be free?" He agrees and says that she recently turned 7 years old. She constantly asks who he is like and what kind of person he is. He points to a truck that is heading their way and says that they have arrived. They must go to them. The man got out of the truck and picked up one of the boxes, which he placed on the ground in front of them. He opens the lid of this box in which there were weapons and says that there are 3 Type 56 rifles. Caliber 7.62, 300 rounds. 3 clips. Park Caillou took one of the rifles that he wanted to inspect and thinks that one thing is for sure. The weapon was in good condition. The game was worth the candle. After inspection, he put this rifle on the box. He looks to the side and sees Wang Su, who is communicating with 2 men who are sitting in a truck. He says that everything is fine in Korea now. He ends the call and turns to Park Caillou, who is standing behind him. He looks at him with a calm expression and says nothing. Wang Su walks up to him, puts his hand on the rifle, and tells the boss that he should listen to him. He then remembered that he had once said that he would live alone in the bunker. He continues to keep his hand on the rifle and says that it will probably not be easy for him alone. He slowly moves the rifle closer to him. Park Caillou looks at him with a calm expression, thinks about it, agrees and says that there are problems. Wang Su looks at him and says that's how it is. Park Caillou quietly withdraws his hand, puts his hand behind his back, continues to look at him, and is about to say something. He took the weapon that he was hiding behind his back and asks what's wrong. Does he want to help him? Wang Su looks at him with a calm expression and ponders what is happening. He smiles and says that everything is not like that at all. This is his decision. He just thought that the shelter was so big in case someone decided to visit him. However, the boss seems to prefer being alone. If he gets bored, he can contact them. He knows where they work. Wang Su gets ready to leave and says that although he has no work left, he will probably return north to his daughter. It was just a bad joke. He didn't think that he would take everything seriously. They should get back to business. He will send cartridges and clips after payment. Park Caillou watches him leave and thinks that he will probably come back and do what he couldn't do today. Because, as it seems to him, this does not look like a joke at all. And sometimes cruelty is simply inevitable. On day X, when Wang Su called Park Caillou on the phone, he looks at the monitor, which shows what the CCTV cameras are filming, and thinks that until he returns to his homeland, he will need to live somewhere and protect himself with something. He looks at Wang Su walking towards the bunker with an axe in his hand and thinks that besides, he knows the exact location of the bunker and the layout. Park Caillou looks at his phone and thinks that, however, the moral dilemma was resolved very quickly. He answers the call and says he is listening to him. Wang Su quickly runs towards the bunker and greets the boss. Park Caillou asks what does he need. He continues to run with an axe in his hand and says that it's nothing. He just decided to personally deliver the package to him. The money has arrived, so where should he leave his goods? Ash looks at him through the security cameras and thinks that there is a bright side to the current situation. He takes his axe and thinks that he came alone. He comes out of his bunker and sees Wang Su with an axe in his hand, standing in front of him. Park Caillou glares at him and thinks he should deal with him before this changes. They stand in front of each other for a few seconds and Wang Su takes out his axe and is about to fight him. He makes a very quick dash towards him and begins to attack with his axe. When he got close enough, he immediately struck with his weapon. Park Caillou ducked in time and dodged this blow. He jumped to the side and continues to watch Wang Su, who is standing in front of him. He swings his axe back and hits the neck of his opponent, who did not expect this blow. Wang Su was very surprised by what had just happened and blood began to flow from his wound. Park Caillou swings his axe and is about to strike again as Wang Su falls to the ground. With his blow, he wounded him even more, causing Wang Su to fall to the ground, trying to stop the blood that flows from his wounds and asking in Chinese who he even is. Is he a soldier or from the Secret Service? He stands on all fours and asks if he is a martial artist. He grabs his leg with his bloody hands and begs him to spare him. Wang Su asks him in Korean to save him and help him. Park Caillou looks at him with a calm expression on his face and says that he is unlikely to be able to do anything about it. Even if he doesn't finish him off, he will die from blood loss. Wang Su realized the situation he was in and tells the boss that he would like him to do it quickly then. Park Caillou dealt the final blow with his axe and killed him. Wang Su's dead body lies on the ground in a pool of his blood. Park Caillou heard the ringtone playing because Wang Su's phone was ringing. He looks for his phone number and wonders if he didn't come alone. He takes the phone out of his pocket and sees that his daughter is calling him. The call ended, but notifications come from messages and he looks at it. The daughter of the murdered Wang Su writes to her dad that he should return quickly and sends emoticons. Park Caillou thinks that every minute counts and he is not going to waste his time. It's too late to change anything. 29 days after the nuclear attack. Park Caillou, wearing a gas mask, rides his buggy and thinks that as soon as the radiation levels decreased, he went to the Air Force Base. He enters the destroyed base and examines everything that was here. He notices something and says that he cannot believe his eyes. He sees a lot of weapons lying on the ground and thinks that he has found El Dorado. There would be enough weapons here for a whole group of mercenaries. In the end, his original plan worked. After some time, he arrived in the city and sees the body of a man who was sitting in the car. Park Caillou looks at this and wonders. He still sometimes wonders how it would have ended if Wang Su had come here first, or if he had not contacted him at all. He drives away in his car and wonders if he would survive in this damned world. Would he meet his daughter? He doesn't really believe it. In the video, a man greets his comrades and says that number 337 is on the line. Today, he will make a doll from felt. His daughter just loves it. First, you need to roll a felt ball. At first, it will not be easy to do. Park Caillou follows the man in the video and thinks that the video he is watching now was recorded after the war began. The source of the video is a community of people who believed in the end of the world. Viva Apocalypse. An extremely large entrepreneur, he launched the Galaxy Link satellite into orbit, so even after a nuclear war, they still have the internet. He continues to make a doll from felt, and the man says that at first it will not be easy, but then it will start to work out. Park Caillou thinks that thanks to technological advances, survivors can still keep in touch with each other. The man says with a smile that afterward, all protruding parts need to be carefully processed. After some time, he puts the resulting toy on the table and says that that's all. Park Caillou thinks that his soul immediately becomes easier. The man asks, what will they say? Not that hard, right? Park Caillou looks at his toy, which is completely different from what the man got in the video, and says nothing. He looks at the toy he made and says that he thinks he saw something similar in one strange village. After some time, Park Caillou thinks that exactly a year has passed since the beginning of the war. Although there were no more bombings, the enemies captured the entire region. A huge creature with many huge tentacles is moving around the city. Park Caillou thinks that the government has lost all control over the situation and the old life has become a long-forgotten dream. Lately, there has been more and more talk about refugees, as well as people who have not appeared online for a long time. Suspicions turn to fear and hatred. Park Caillou sits in his bunker and looks at the monitor of his laptop, which has a survivor forum open with news. He thinks that if one judges sensibly, it did not start without any reason at all. The window on his monitor says that he has blocked the user defender. Park Caillou thinks that this is the person whom the forum users called the Manhunter. From the very beginning of the war, the human hunter posted posts with his deeds. He didn't kill for fun. The reason was much clearer. It was a warning. Defender writes on the forum, maybe it's time to be more active. In his opinion, he got rid of all the survivors whose territory overlaps with his. It's probably time to check out a couple of the guys who posted photos of their shelters myself. An anonymous user writes, but how will he understand where to look? Defender writes that he already wrote, based on photographs of shelters. Park Caillou thinks that when he took him out of the blacklist to look at the latest posts, he realized that he had become addicted to killing. And anyone who follows his posts on a regular basis will become aggressive and suspicious. He was very surprised when he noticed one of the posts on this forum and thinks that then he received a notification that the anonymous person 337, who made toys, had not been online for a long time. 395 days after They are, after all, on its territory. After this, the doors to the bunker immediately closed. A man with a machine gun in his hands says displeasedly that the doors have closed. The director grabs him by the shoulder and tells him that he shouldn't react to this. They will find a ventilation shaft and drive him out. He built this bunker himself. There is only one entrance and, naturally, also one exit. They'll find a vent, throw a couple of grenades at him, and that'll be the end of him. Park Caillou takes out a machine from the closet and thinks that this is a game in which the bet is life. He moves the cabinet and thinks that he never thought that a battle against ordinary marauders would turn into such problems. There was a secret passage behind this closet, and he thinks that, however, there is something they don't know. He leaves through the tunnel and thinks that when Hong and his guys finished construction, he expanded the bunker, relying on his knowledge. They, without having the slightest idea about it, go to meet their death. Park Caillou opens the hatch that leads outside, holds the machine gun with one hand and looks around. He goes to where the ventilation is and hears the director saying that he turned out to be quite stubborn and is still holding on. He should throw a couple more grenades there. Park Caillou quietly approached them with a machine gun in his hands and looks at them from behind a tree. The man pulls the grenade pin and tells the boss that he will do as he says. Park Caillou came out of his hiding place and suddenly shot at the man with a grenade in his hand. He hits this man's head. This greatly surprised the others, and they look at Park Caillou with a machine gun in his hand. Director Hong was very surprised when he saw another newly killed man fall to the ground. He raises his hands and loudly says that he gives up. He shouldn't shoot. Park Caillou looks at him with a cool expression and asks how many more are there. The director continues to hold his hands up and says that he is the last one. He is very surprised when he notices a machine gun pointed at his head and says that it is true. There were 5 of them, including him. Park Caillou says he has to take the bodies to the truck. Sometime later, Director Hong, at whom the machine gun was pointed, loads all the bodies of the killed people into a truck. At the same moment, Park Caillou notices something that attracts his attention and looks at it in surprise. An expression of very strong surprise appears on his face. He puts his hand into the truck and pushes away the director, who is surprised by this and loudly asks what else does he need. Park Caillou takes out a well-made toy made by anonymous user 337. Immediately afterwards, with an angry expression on his face, he strikes Director Han's face with the butt of his machine gun. He fell to the ground because of this blow, and Park Caillou says that he must explain to him. What did they do to the person who made this doll? Did they kill everyone who was in the shelter? The director says that he must wait. He understood everything wrong. Park Caillou doesn't listen to him and hits him on the head very hard. He holds the director's clothes and he says loudly that they didn't kill anyone. There was only one old man there. He covers his face with his hand because he's afraid he'll get hit again and says loudly that when they got there he was already dead. They simply took valuables from the bunker and left. Park Caillou says he should take him to that bunker. Sometime later. Together they approach a bunker with an open door, and he thinks that this place is surprisingly close. It took them 30 minutes to travel by truck. He went inside and immediately recognized the bunker with the video of anonymous person 337. They both look at the body of a murdered man with a sticker that says Defender, and the director says that they have arrived. Park Caillou looks around and imagines how a man with the nickname Defender killed a man with a pistol. He turns and looks at the place where, in his opinion, the killer stood. He looks at the head of the man with the sticker and thinks that a human hunter definitely did this. It's his doing. Some time ago, Defender posted a photo of 2 killed people and writes that he got rid of 2 beetles. It seems like it's already winter outside, but there are still a lot of insects. How do they not freeze, and where do they even come from? Park Caillou stands still and thinks that the corpse can tell a lot more than people think. He plunges into memories when he was a military man, and one of the soldiers loudly calls him captain and asks if he found anything. Park Caillou looked at the body of the murdered man and thinks that it is possible to find out not only the cause of death, but also the conditions in which the victim found himself at the time of death, the murder weapon, and how the fatal wound was inflicted. Even the behavior patterns of the criminal. He says that the body has decomposed too much. It will not give them anything. He gets up and says that, however, There is nothing to worry about. He looks around and says that there are more than enough bodies here. There's a whole mountain of corpses here. Park Caillou imagines a person with the nickname Defender and thinks that he can also find out his attitude towards death. Director Hong, who stands next to him with his hands raised, says that he did everything. He'll let him go, right? Park Caillou points a machine gun at him, which greatly scares him, and he asks why. He did everything he asked. He had reasons to do so. He has children, for sure. Everything is for the sake of the children. Without him, they will die. He doesn't want innocent children to die of hunger, does he? Park Caillou puts a silencer on his machine gun and says he thinks there was a little misunderstanding. He would never in his life have spared a marauder who knew where he lived. Besides, he had already heard this excuse. He fired from his machine gun and thinks that there is one more corpse in this empty shelter. Sometime later, Park Caillou went outside to hang his clothes to dry. He wipes his face with his hand and thinks that he has lived so much in the bunker that he has begun to appreciate the warm, fresh air. He sat down on the ground and thinks that this is a short respite from the cold and worries. Blissful calm under the light of the sun. He closes his eyes and says that this is heaven on earth. Park Caillou notices a small drone flying next to him and thinks that, however, everything comes at a price. And in this dying world, the exchange rate is very high. On the forum, a person with the nickname Dongtanmum writes that it was fun. The other day he saw some kind of flying thing. It turned out that it was a drone. He has no time to write. Someone is right now trying to break into his bunker using welding. Park Caillou thinks that he is now hiding in a high-rise building in the south of Dongtan. The actions of local raiders are reflected in a series of posts by one survivor. And since he had no means of self-defense, he intended to blow up the whole of Dongtan if he had no other choice. This post, which contained information about the looters, as well as the misadventures of the Dongtan survivors, attracted everyone's attention. And the frightening truth was revealed to them. Marauders are becoming more inventive and insidious. And they too can sit at Viva Apocalypse. The information they need to survive may one day be their undoing. On this day, each of them who survived understood one thing. Whatever one may say, they will have to fight for their lives. Over time, group survival became more and more popular. The survivors began to prepare for full-fledged battles among themselves. No, but he, naturally, thought completely differently. Can be won once, even if twice, but the root of all troubles, human selfishness, will not go away. A larger group is easier to spot. And if they are attacked by a stronger group, then everything is lost. Armed conflict is a last resort. The best way to survive is stealth. And in this regard, there is no better territory than his. There is so much nothing here that neither looters nor tramps simply have no reason to come here. And a pack of mutated wild dogs also recently settled here. He doesn't envy anyone who decides to come here. He heard that radioactive zombies began to appear in a city nearby, and the survivor shoots them with a sniper rifle. Park Caillou sits looking at the monitor and thinks that we shouldn't forget that there are always bigger fish. At the same time, there are two men sitting in the car, one of whom is holding a joystick with a screen for controlling the drone. On the monitor, he sees Park Caillou and loudly asks where he went. Where can you even hide in these wastelands? He climbs out through the window and loudly asks the men nearby if they were sure they were looking well. Maybe they just got the place wrong? Another man asks this idiot how many Air Force bases he thinks there are. Maybe he's just blind. He should stop talking and send out the drone. The man climbs back into the car and says that he will find him, and maybe they will at least recoup the cost of gas. He is about to say something, but stops when he notices something on the screen. He looks at the video being broadcast from the drone and asks, "What is this?" He looks at a woman in a military uniform with a sniper rifle in her hand and asks, "Is this a woman?" He looks at her with a surprised expression and says that judging by her clothes, she is an American soldier. He turns to the men next to the car with a joyful expression on his face and says that he has found a better victim. What do they think about turning around? The man who is standing next to the car turns around and with a very frightened expression on his face asks, "What is he saying?" These people are attacked by mutated dogs and they start running away with very scared expressions on their faces. The man who controls the drone was very shocked while watching these monsters kill the men from their team. He climbed back into the car and loudly said that these dogs were mutants. They must leave here quickly. The man who was driving asked loudly, "What about the others?" The man flying the drone says they can't help it. Besides, it's too early for him to die. They crash into a man, and the man flying the drone loudly tells the idiot that he should keep his eyes on the road. The man they hit remained on the windshield, and they began to panic greatly because of this and scream loudly. They crashed into a pole, and several mutated dogs are coming toward them. Two men who were sitting in the car were very badly injured after this collision, and the driver, who remained conscious, was looking at something. He was very scared when he noticed a mutated dog that came up to their car and was looking at him. This monster stuck its head through the window and bit the man who was driving. This happened on the 458th day after day X. Someone took a photograph of this car from above and wrote that the information was about a group of looters in Gyeonggi-do. He came upon a truck that had crashed into a telephone pole near some rice fields. There is blood everywhere, and the local survivors are absolutely delighted. Park Kyu thinks the news came out a week later. The commotion that Dong Tanmum had started slowly died down. Park Kyu looks at his laptop monitor and thinks that these mutant dogs are somewhere nearby. He notices that a user named Dong Tanmum wrote something in the comments and it caught his attention. Park Kyu looks at this and thinks that everyone has already forgotten about him, but he got in touch again. It seemed like he was trying to get attention again. Dong Tanmum writes that this time everything is serious. No nonsense today. His refuge is in Gwangyeo, not Dongtan. He has 5 people at his door. If someone lives nearby, you should scare them with something. At least with fireworks. He asks for help. Otherwise, he will blow himself up. Park Kyu thinks he ended up writing about the explosion again. The man who wrote this post is holding a detonator in his hand and loudly says that someone should quickly look at his post. He sees that there was one viewing and Park Kyu thinks that after the last time no one believed him. The marauders were able to open the door to his bunker and loudly say that they succeeded. They must kill him. Dong Tanmum pressed the button and blew up his bunker, and Park Kyu thinks that this time everything was serious. Defender writes, "Has everyone heard this?" In the Gwangyeo area, it exploded quite well. Another user writes that is this storyteller Dong Tanmum really dead? Park Kyu looks at this and thinks he will mean it. But now there are more important things to do. He looks at the drone control panel and thinks that there is one threat that is very close. On the screen you can see a woman aiming a sniper rifle at this drone. Park Kyu thinks it's time for him to meet his neighbors. Sometime later, he came to a multi-story building in which there was a woman with a sniper rifle. He raises his head and looks at this tall building. The woman fires another shot from her sniper rifle. Park Kyu looks in surprise at the bullet, which flies very quickly towards him. The bullet flew very close to him and hit the head of the zombie who was next to him. He looks at it and thinks that he has entered the territory of his neighbor, the rabid sniper. He sits down on his knee and looks at something on the ground. He sees the hole from the bullet that she fired. Park Kyu thinks that the holes from the warning shots are too close to the aiming shots, so she has no choice but to shoot. In some ways, she is even more dangerous than the defender. He came here to find out more about a neighbor he found using a drone. Judging by her hair, equipment, and weapons, she was a member of the US military forces stationed in Korea. At the beginning of the war, the United States, being in the position of the strongest country in the world, intercepted most of the nuclear missiles and defended the main territory. But the problems started after that. They withdrew all their external combat assets, including from Korea, to try to defend against the rifts from which the monsters are emerging. While she is here, he will not be able to have full control over the Air Force base and quietly engage in reconnaissance too. He, of course, would like to avoid clashes with trained soldiers, but if someone enters his territory, a clash cannot be avoided. He will not live with a threat at his side. 481 days later, Day X, near a multi-story building where a female sniper is sitting. Park Kyu looks at this building through binoculars and thinks that he was examining her behavior patterns. The shooting stops around this time every day. Most likely she is going to bed. This is the only time he can approach the building. The entrance is blocked by a barricade, so the best option to get inside quietly is through the roof of another building. Immediately after that, he jumped onto the roof and caught on the edge of the building. He looks down and sees metal rods sticking out of the stone. He hangs on the edge of the building and looks down for a few seconds before taking a deep breath. He abruptly climbs onto the floor and immediately takes out his sniper rifle from behind his back. He takes the rifle in his hands, takes aim, and looks around. Park Caillou looks around this floor, which is completely empty. He wonders, is there anyone here? He starts walking, looks around with a serious expression on his face, and thinks that he needs to be on his guard. He climbs the stairs and holds his weapon at the ready. He sees a closed door and thinks it is the top floor. The door behind, which is a sniper's hideout. He didn't meet anyone on the way here. He slowly opens the door and sees a woman sleeping in a sleeping bag. He looks at her and thinks that she is sleeping, as he thought, "It will be good if you can avoid it." He does not have time to finish his thought because a woman is standing behind him, pointing her weapon at him and telling him in English that he must lower his weapon. The sleeping bag was filled with various items to create the appearance that there was a person there, and Park Caillou lowered his weapon and raised his free hand. He looks back and wonders, did she notice him and ambush him? Judging by the voice, it is a young woman. Most likely the one he saw from the drone. The woman says that she repeats for the last time. He must put the weapon on the floor. Park Caillou thinks she is standing relatively far away. The barrel is long enough. It's definitely not a pistol. He threw his weapon on the floor and thinks she let her guard down. He turns around very sharply, takes her weapon to the side, and thinks that he cannot talk to the enemy until he is completely neutralized. The woman was very surprised by this and begins to shoot with a worried expression on her face, but Park Caillou does not allow her to point the weapon at him. He continues to hold on to the barrel of her rifle and looks at her with a serious expression on his face. The woman continues to fire her rifle, but Park Caillou grabs her shoulder with his other hand. He delivers a very fast and unexpected kick to her leg. Because of this blow, the woman lost her balance and her leg buckled. This surprised her very much, and she screamed in surprise. She fell to the ground and is holding on to the place where he hit her. Park Caillou took his weapon while the woman tried to crawl away from him. He quickly returned to her and placed his foot on her back. He presses his foot hard on this woman and points his weapon at her. Park Caillou looks at her and says that he didn't want things to turn out like this. Initially, he only wanted to find out how many people there were. But while examining the building, he came across an arsenal. And he really doesn't want the local marauders to ever get to it. The woman looks at him with an angry expression as she lies on the ground. Park Caillou says that if she wanted to survive so much, she should have stayed quiet. The blame for her indiscretion lies solely with her. The woman says very loudly that she should not look here. Park Caillou continues to hold the rifle at the woman with one hand, grabs his pistol, which he points to the side and wonders, is there anyone else here? A girl wearing a bulletproof vest and helmet comes out from around the corner, and the woman says loudly that she can't come here. Park Caillou is surprised when he notices a young girl who didn't have a gun. A young girl looks at what is happening with a surprised expression on her face and calls her mother. Park Caillou looks at her in surprise and wonders, is this a child? The woman is very angry about what is happening and clenches her teeth tightly due to tension. She throws an unexpected blow with her hand and Park Caillou notices this blow. She finishes her blow, but he manages to react to it and jumps to the side. He watches the woman pull out her gun and thinks he thought he used enough force. Can she still resist? He aims his sniper rifle at her and thinks that he needs to finish her off before she is ready to defend herself. Park Caillou is very surprised when he notices that the woman decided not to attack him, but ran to her daughter and hugged her. He turns around and sees the woman protecting her daughter from him. He thinks that at first he thought she would jump for the rifle. This would improve their chances of survival. He looks at her rifle, which lies on the ground, and thinks that, nevertheless, she acted differently. Park Caillou looks at this in surprise and thinks that she is not mad at all. She simply found herself in an untamed jungle. The woman turns to him, points a gun at him, and he wonders how she could protect her daughter, finding herself in a foreign, destroyed country. Naturally, she had to pull the trigger at the first sign of threat. Park Caillou kicks and knocks the gun out of her hand. He does not point a weapon at them. He points to the side and says that there is his land. She can't go there, otherwise he will shoot. Did he explain clearly? She can't go there. She should sit here and look after the child. They both look at him, and he thinks that she should have understood this. The woman is silent, and her daughter asks if he has any medicine. Park Caillou asks, did she say medicine? The woman lifts her pant leg and shows that her leg is injured. He looks at it and thinks it's a pretty serious wound. Is that why she moved so slowly? Park Caillou throws something at them with a sharp movement of his hand. The woman caught this item, and he says that it contains antibiotics and anti-inflammatory drugs. This should help. She should accept it as an apology for the intrusion. The woman starts saying in Korean that this is not what she meant. She bites her lip and asks if he has any illegal substances. After she says this, they look at each other for a few seconds. Park Caillou looks at her and thinks that he can understand her. In such a situation, you want to find any comfort, even illusory. He says it is not a cure for all diseases. He doesn't remember it helping anyone. He points to the woman's daughter and asks if she knows Korean. He thinks that from that day on he began to support them. He regularly handed them painkillers and skim milk at the agreed location. In recent days, there have been noticeably more shots fired. The frequency of shots is very high, but it does not look like a shootout. It was clear from her that day that she was already completely on the edge. She doesn't shoot at enemies in her sights, but at the demons in her head. Park Caillou notices a glare of light that has entered his eye and turns to the building where the woman is with her daughter. He looks at her for a few seconds and realizes that this is Morse code and she wants to say that they want to meet there. Sometime later at the place where they agreed to meet. Park Caillou stands still and notices a girl who ran to him and called him. With a worried expression on her face, she says that her mother has become ill. He thinks she escorted him into the building after that, and he would never have guessed what awaited him inside. The entire shelter was littered with all sorts of American symbols. Patriotism was the only substitute for substances that she could come up with. It's very touching. The woman turns around and notices them. Park Caillou bandages her injured leg, and she says in mixed English and Korean that they have an RPG. They come here day and night. Park Caillou thinks that the looters are flocking to the sound of gunfire, and her leg is getting worse and worse due to delayed treatment. The girl hugs her mom while he sits still and looks at them. The woman says that she really misses home. She misses her family, friends, and native language. She looks outside and says that, however, her house is across the ocean. She turns to her daughter and a tear begins to flow down her face, which her daughter wipes away. The woman asks again if he has any illegal substances. Park Caillou looks at her with a very serious expression on his face. He says that even if he had it, he still wouldn't give it. No matter how much you run away from reality, problems will not go away. He can only help her a little. And for this, he needs a weapon. After some time in a city where there was a camp of many people, Park Caillou stands near this camp and thinks that he waited for the rain. There was no better moment to leave your territory. The rain limits visibility and the cold forces people to huddle in groups around the fire. He notices a slightly open box containing supplies. Park Caillou looks at this and thinks that the missiles must be here somewhere. He takes out an RPG, loads it up, and thinks they have the advantage in numbers. Several men are sitting by a fire barrel and talking calmly to each other. One of them hears a loud sound that attracts his attention and immediately turns towards this sound. He notices Park Caillou firing an RPG in his direction. A very strong explosion occurs. He throws the weapon aside, takes out a machine gun, and thinks that therefore he must reduce their number as much as possible with the first attack. The chain of explosions is moving in a good direction, but more survived than he expected. One of the guys starts to run away with a worried look on his face, but is shot in the head and dies immediately. Park Caillou looks at them with a calm expression and fires his machine gun. Many people who did not expect this attack try to hide or start shooting back. Park Caillou notices something from the side and immediately looks at it. He falls to the ground, aims in the other direction, and immediately shoots at several armed men who were running in his direction. Someone shot at him, and he noticed that the bullet flew next to him. Someone says loudly that here he is, they should shoot him. Immediately afterwards, several people started shooting at Park Caillou. He ran away with an unknown wound, and one of the men loudly asks where he went. They say it looks like he escaped. How many were there? Has anyone seen them? There are definitely not many of them. He should go get the guys from Gapyeong. They must resolve this issue before dawn. One of the guys runs and says that he understood him. Suddenly Park Caillou hits one of the men in the head, and this surprised the guy who was about to call for help. He kills another man, and it really surprised this guy. Park Caillou comes out to them from the darkness and says that he understands why in a tense situation they are so drawn to the light. But this only exposes them more. He takes out his axe and says that he was very cold while waiting in the pouring rain, so he wants to deal with it quickly. The guy looks at him with a very surprised expression on his face and cannot say anything. Park Caillou swings his axe and says that like the man who asked him to do this, he really misses his home. Sometime later, when it was over, he called both girls into the bunker. The girl asks why the toilet is in the very center. Park Caillou is a little angry, but doesn't show it and says that she should sit next to her mom and not ask him questions. Immediately afterwards, he bandages the woman's leg. He got angry when he noticed the girl looking at what he had in his drawers and saying he was done. The woman puts on her pants after that, and Park Caillou says that he did exactly the same as in the video, so everything should be fine. The woman looks at him and says nothing. He also looks at her and thinks that he very much doubts that she will immediately feel better. He can only heal external wounds, but not mental ones. He turns around and looks at his laptop monitor and notices something. He thinks it's a miracle cure for the rabid sniper. The forum says he's looking for something to eat. Does anyone have any suggestions? Park Caillou calls the woman over and says she should take a look at it. She looks at the monitor screen, and he thinks that this is the English Viva Apocalypse forum. The American domain is the main one, and there are many times more users there. The woman turns and asks, "What is this? Is it somehow connected with the States?" Park Caillou says that naturally it is so. She can try to write something. The woman immediately starts writing something on the forum. Under the nickname Skeleton, she greeted the guys in the comments on the forum and put a smiley face at the end. A user with the nickname FF12040231 asks why she is smiling. Sometime later, Park Caillou sits in front of his laptop monitor and thinks that time has passed inexorably. It's already the second Christmas after the apocalypse. A free Christmas tree decorating game made by a former developer has gained popularity. His tree was almost empty and not popular. But the trees of famous users were flooded with comments. On the Defender tree, there were a lot of comments related to the fact that he is crazy and should stop killing, and he wrote that he will kill the culprit when he catches him. Park Caillou looks at this with a smile and says that he didn't expect anything else from his Christmas tree. His attention is drawn to the fact that the walkie-talkie began to make hissing sounds, and the girl asks Skeleton, "Can you hear her?" Park Caillou asks if this is Sue. How is her mom doing? She says mom is sleeping now. She wanted to ask him for a laptop for a short time. She wants to do the New Year's countdown with people from North America. Some time ago, the woman sits in front of the laptop while Park Caillou brings them food, and she thanks him. She says her name is Rebecca and her daughter is Sue. What's his name? Park Caillou thinks that he kept in touch with them constantly after that incident. When he told them his name, they heard an insult in English. So he settled on his nickname from the forum. In present time, Park Caillou says he will bring them the laptop later. End of connection. Sue asks him to wait. She calls him Skeleton and wishes him a Merry Christmas. Park Caillou was very surprised when he heard this, and a smile appeared on his face. He says that he wishes them a Merry Christmas too. He hopes that everything will be fine with them. A notification appears on his laptop screen that a user has decorated his tree. A toy with the inscription John Lennon appeared on his Christmas tree. Park Caillou reads this, then thinks that he never thought he would see this nickname again. Who and why drew a parallel between them? He knows who this ghost is, and very well. 945 days before the day of X. Viva Apocalypse. This is a community of people who expect the end of the world. The server is located on a separate satellite. And there is even illegal information there, which is justified by the topic. The largest anonymous resource dedicated to the apocalypse, used by people from all over the world. Park Caillou thinks that at least that's how it was promoted. But initially, he couldn't afford a subscription. Is there any point in spending money to read what rich people write? He initially started using the forum because it was difficult to cook alone, but he never found any useful information. It will be better if he invests money in the bunker. He was very surprised when he noticed something on this forum. John Nennon wrote, "The need and use of fake bins. Tips. When it comes to long-term survival, the tactical and strategic advantage provided by false bunkers cannot be overestimated. This can be connected to the main bunker and used for reconnaissance and surveillance purposes, or simply to mislead attackers." Park Caillou looks at this article with a surprised expression on his face and says that the fake ones should be mined in advance. If enemies occupy the bunker, you can get rid of all the attackers with the press of one button. He thinks that he had many more extremely thoughtful ideas in his articles. His philosophy of survival is similar to his, but the ideas are much more inventive. He asks, what does this John Nennon do anyway? Park Caillou looks at the search results with his nickname and thinks that the community has its own star. He stood out for his amazing knowledge in any matter. And, naturally, people became interested in his personality. And he responded to forum users. John Lennon posted a photo of his ID, hiding his face. Park Caillou looks at this photo and wonders if he is a hunter. About 10 years ago, strange phenomena began to appear all over the world, which people called rifts. Soon, eerie creatures called monsters began to appear from the cracks. Each country was concerned about creating detachments to fight them. Hunters are those who fight monsters. He plunges into memory, and someone says that a large monster has been spotted. The invasion begins. These monsters attack a squad of several hunters who are standing on the street. One of these hunters was Park Caillou. All these hunters take out their weapons and point it at the monsters that are heading towards them. They immediately start shooting at the huge monster that is heading towards them. This monster falls down and Park Caillou, with an axe in his hand, dodges this attack. He looks at the monsters that are heading towards him and other hunters stand behind him. He notices a rift that has appeared in the air and says they are coming. He thinks that the identities of top-class hunters are kept as state secrets. Each of them is an elite soldier who has gone through countless trainings and battles. Park Caillou looks at his laptop screen and thinks that according to the John Nennon license, he is not one of them. But the hunter's certificate raised his authority even higher. Broad knowledge appropriate to his position. Hunter's certificate, everything is in the best possible way. And he very quickly became the most famous figure in the entire community. But if only it were that simple. He became the most popular and influential person in the entire community. But popularity does not come alone. Envious people who attacked his every post with all their might. One of the users wrote that he still covered his face. This is definitely a false ID. Park Caillou eats ice cream and thinks that, however, all of their attacks were so baseless that they would not leave even a small stain on his reputation. John Nennon is not an idiot. He will not answer them. He was very surprised when he noticed something on this forum. John Nennon posted his photo and wrote, "Is that better?" Park Caillou thinks that he still answered this, and not at all in the way he expected. People started writing, did he reveal his personal identity because of some nonsense? Is he a complete idiot? It looks kind of boring. Maybe he just wants to attract attention. Park Caillou thinks the community's reaction has been extremely lukewarm. What came up was that he had a D rank, the lowest rank possible for a hunter. It would be better if he just continued to write informational posts. He ruined everything for himself with this Denon. But he didn't stop there. Park Caillou was very surprised when one of the posts on the forum. John Nennon wrote that he wants to hold a meeting with fans. He thinks he has decided to face the problem head-on. 600 days until day X. John Nennon stands in a small restaurant, gives his nickname and says that in life he is Ku Sang Hayo. He is happy to see them all. One of the people who were in front of him was Park Caillou, who thinks that including him, there were 10 people here. Sang Hayo says he tells the woman so much that she should bring as much pork breast as his 9 friends will eat. He's on a diet now, so he won't. The woman says there are 10 of them here, by order per person. Sang Hayo was embarrassed by this, thought about it, and said that then for 10. Park Caillou thinks he said he was on a diet, but as soon as the food appeared on the table, he immediately attacked the meat and beer. Either he had not eaten for several days, or he wanted to win back his money in full. After that, 2 middle-aged men, who judging by their clothes were far from poor, talked and left. He sits with a calm expression on his face and looks at the other people. Sang Hayo says that the war will start soon. China will most likely start it. They have serious problems with faults. They say one of China's internal units is mutinying, defying orders from the center. Park Caillou looks at him and thinks that he was telling things that were known to any person who was interested in this matter. And all his information is already 6 months out of date. Sang Hayo, with a reddened expression due to alcohol, asks who he is. Park Caillou, who is sitting in front of him, says that his nickname is Skeleton. Sang Hayo recognizes him and asks how the bunker construction is going there. Park Caillou says with a worried expression that he has new problems every day. He can't find a company that can make decent fuel tanks. Sang Hayo agrees and says that he has heard of such a thing. And somehow nothing comes to mind. Park Caillou thinks that he would not have expected anything else. He has no knowledge and connections. There will be no help from him. He was very surprised when Sang Hayo asked if he wanted him to look into this matter. Park Caillou agrees, after which he immediately takes out his phone and says that he will ask people then. Maybe we can find out something. Has he ever heard of the rule of 6 handshakes? He believes in it. He calls his boss, gives his name, and says he needs a fuel tank company. Some time later, Park Caillou looks at the fuel tanks that were placed in his bunker and is silent for several seconds. He says that this is normal and thinks that thanks to him he was able to bring the bunker to fruition. Despite the bad first impression, he turned out to be a very useful acquaintance. When there are 401 left until day X, Park Caillou thinks that what he was best at was gathering people. Afterwards, he continued to organize meetings. And at the last of these meetings, there were about 80 people. Park Caillou was present at this meeting and thinks that every time more and more people come, but they constantly say all sorts of nonsense. He probably won't go next time. Sang Hayo approaches him, his face red due to intoxication, and asks if he would give him a minute of his time. They go outside together and Park Caillou wonders what he needs. Sang Hayo tries to figure out how to start a dialogue and says that this is the case. He has a question. Isn't he a hunter by any chance? Park Caillou looks at him and asks if he thinks he is a hunter. Sang Hayo says he feels like he saw him once. He's almost sure of it. Park Caillou looks down and thinks that for a second he even doubted. He can invent something, however. He agrees and is about to say something, but notices that his interlocutor was no longer around. Many people came to Sang Hayo, and one of them asked where he ran away to. They were looking for him here on television. One of the guys holds his hand and says that the reporter is already waiting. Sang Hayo says they should wait a minute. The guy looks at Park Caillou and asks, "What is it? Did he and that guy talk about something? If it is not urgent, then he should forget and go inside with them. The TV won't wait." Sang Hayo turns at the entrance to the restaurant and is about to say something to him. In this restaurant, there is a girl reporter, and one of the men who is standing on the street asks who this guy is. Doesn't he understand that he has more important things to do? Sang Hayo looks at the female reporter with a surprised expression on her face and is silent for a few seconds. A big smile appears on his face, and he says that he seems to be starting to understand. It's just that the guy looks like one of his friends. The man next to him asks which friend. Is he also a hunter? The female reporter says they should greet John Nenon, the acting hunter. Park Caillou remained standing on the street and silently looks at these people. He left and thinks that this was their last meeting in person. John Nenon became a real star. The Un spoke on many broadcasts, which further strengthened its position. He was there as a representative of Viva Apocalypse and as an expert on the question of the end of the world. Then he began giving lectures. He was monetizing his fame as a doomsday salesman with all his might. He began to conduct special consultations for rich people. He didn't just make a wave, but worked the oars with all his might. And the main springboard for his success were the guys from Viva Apocalypse. Forum users worshipped him like some kind of god. He watched their reactions and began to believe that they would follow him like sheep. This thought buried him. His secretary wrote to him that a post had appeared on the forum that showed him in a bad light. John Ninon, a cunning freak, he's just copying posts from the European forum. Park Caillou thinks that as a result, an entire army of armchair detectives took over the investigation. And these guys were not worth joking with. The bubble called John Ninon burst. People began to write in the comments that it was now clear why he boasted so much. He pretended to be an expert, but what was the result? Here is the evidence. Evidence that someone likes to make things up. He also filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago. So he also accumulated debts. You won't be able to find another clown like him. Park Caillou thinks that during the distance he started to get annoyed that he was just all over the place, so he was glad that it ended like this. He took off quickly, but fell even faster. And anonymous users from the forum who love bullying made it even worse. He did not try to somehow defend himself from countless suspicions and criticism. The last sign of life that he showed remained forever in the history of the forum. Sang Hayo, under his nickname, wrote an offensive comment under one of the posts. Park Caillou thinks that thus the Viva Apocalypse star has faded. Currently, Park Caillou looks at the screen of his laptop and thinks that in the end there was no point in the lawsuit. The bomb hit before the meeting began. And here he is. And he wonders who drew the parallel between them. Is this just a coincidence? Or is it John Ninon himself? Under his nickname, he writes to the user Fox Games that he wants to ask something. Can he tell who left the message on his tree? Fox Games writes that he will think about it if he says why he needs it. Park Caillou thinks he is a hacker and former game developer. It was he who made this game with the Christmas tree. He looks at the laptop screen with a thoughtful expression on his face and thinks that that day he didn't even know how this would end up turning out for him. Fox Games writes that it found this user. His nickname is 180cm. Park Caillou writes to this user, who is he? He doesn't remember them communicating before. Some time later, a voice on the radio says it's an announcement from the National Crisis Management Office. Even though the world, in their usual understanding, is destroyed, they are still alive. Countless number of dead. Many destroyed cities. To manage them before the upcoming elections, the Disaster Management Headquarters is reopening. General Manager Lee Sang-hoo, unexpectedly. Park Caillou turns off the radio and thinks that the state is still breathing and the heart of the bureaucracy is beating. He packs his backpack and says that there is food and water for 3 days, as well as weapons for self-defense. He thinks that he doesn't really have any hope for them. It just means that the state will fall a little later. But while the concept of a nation still lives in people's minds, he can take advantage of it. That's why he was looking for a place for a bunker closer to the cities. Park Caillou looks around and says that his clothes are very ordinary. He puts on his backpack and thinks that after making sure that there is no one near the bunker, he set off. Now it's time to see what Seoul looks like there today. A year and a half after the fall of the nuclear bomb. He rides a bicycle and thinks that the road to Seoul was as boring as possible. He doesn't even remember anything. But the sight of the city itself evoked complex and contradictory emotions in him. He missed the former landscape, which was difficult to even imagine in these ruins. Sadness immediately came over him, and at the same time, joy rose in the depths of his soul that in the new world he was who he was. Park Caillou turns around and sees 2 people, one of whom had a canister in his hands, standing in front of the corpses of people piled in one pile. A man in a gas mask throws a lit match and sets fire to this pile of dead people, who quickly burst into flames. Park Caillou looks at this with a calm expression and says nothing. Sometime later to the building of the National Crisis Management Office. Park Caillou places his documents on the table, and the woman says that complaints and crime reports are filed through another window. He says that he wants to meet Director Lee Sang-hoo. He is now dealing with the consequences of the disaster. She should say that Park Caillou is looking for him. They were at a military school together. He will immediately remember him. He stands in front of this woman with a kind smile and closed eyes after saying this.